welcome to the second Islanders Analytics podcast, stream. Let me know if the mic is too loud. I apologize. It's my first time using this software instead of the last one. Also, let me know if you can read the numbers on screen right now. Whoa. Should not be doing that. Okay. Howdy, Ethan. Howdy, Mavis. Howdy, Blukes. Or Blue Cheese, if you want to call it that way. Okay, so today I actually have an agenda since I think it's working. Right now, yeah, I know the screen cuts out of Corsi well. I have the screen only partially well. I'll lower the mic right now. Okay, let me know that's better. Okay, so today's agenda, I want to talk about the Islanders' first line. As it turned out hi Manny. As it turned out, I talked a little bit about this on Twitter a couple weeks ago, maybe like 2 weeks ago, and I got a lot of feedback and, I don't know how you say this, angry responses when I suggested that there was a problem with the Islanders' first line, particularly John Tavares and, of course, Vanek and Okposo. Not sure why you're laughing, Manny, but okay. Anyhow, I got a lot of negative feedback, and part of that was from usual sources, but whatever. The point is that I don't think that's an unfair comment from most Islander fans. Hi, doggy. Most Islander fans will tell you the Islanders' first line with Okposo, Tavares, and Vanek was amazing. They scored a ton of points. Tavares was even more than point per game this year. He was on pace again for 30 goals. Not quite in the insane pace as the lockout season when somehow he scored 28 in 48 games. But he was still pretty ridiculous. But there was an issue, and I want to talk about that. And because it's going to be important here. Ethan's on the right track of what we'll be talking on, so we'll get to that in a little bit. So I just want to sum up where we're going here. So the first line scored a ton of goals. Tavares had 24 goals and 42 assists, which, if he had continued, would have been his best season in 82 games. They had their best. Tavares had his best really plus-minus, if you want to use that word, of any season. And he had his best relative plus-minus, which means relative to the team, Tavares' plus-minus was the best it's ever been. So if you use goals, everything is great. Everything is dandy. They outscored the opposition for the second time in Tavares' career, and by a greater amount than last year. Everything seems great. But I'm here to tell you, and what the analytics would tell you, is that there's something a little more troubling going on here. So let's go through what John Tavares did his first couple seasons. If you remember way back in the day, I pronounced it Okposo, damn it. Great. And if you remember back in the day, Neil Greenberg had this infamous top 25 under 25 list, which John Tavares left off in favor of a bunch of goaltenders and the Kostitsins, which was ridiculous at the time. One of his objections was that Tavares' defense was poor, that when Tavares was on the ice, Tavares, this is actually 3 years ago now, the puck was mostly going the other way. You can see that, by the way, right here. So this is the 10-11 season, which Extra Skater now has. So that would be Tavares' second season. The second season. The first one was what? Was it his third season? I can't even remember. Whatever. I think it's a second. Anyhow, for the first couple of years, he didn't manage a Corsi above 50%. Now, again, what Corsi means is it's a practice for possession, the amount of time you have it in the offensive zone. 50% means that half your time is in the offensive, half's in the defensive. Above 50% means you're spending more time in the offensive zone than your opponent's spending in your zone. And below reverse. So obviously you want to be above 50. Now, I wrote a response to Neil's article back in the day saying that, Tavares was under 50%. But if you looked, Tavares, when you look and compare it to his team, was much better than the rest of the team. So he is plus 3.7%. What it means is that while Tavares was only at a 48.5% Corsi, which means that 48.5% of the time the puck was going the right direction, the rest of the team, without Tavares on the ice during those games, was at 44.8%, which is Edmonton Oilers bad. And that's really, really bad. That's Toronto Maple Leafs bad. We're talking bad teams here. And, it wasn't Tavares' fault they were under 50. It was not a good team. They weren't good the first 2 years of Tavares' career. I don't think it's a shame to say that. As it turned out, the next year, Tavares hit about 50%, but again, he was playing much better than his team. He was at plus 4.3% there. And again, that's even better than before. And again, what that means is that without Tavares on the ice, the Islanders were at 46.1%, which is again pretty damn bad. Again, now, as Luke's pointed out, he also had a plus 49 penalty differential, which was pretty ridiculous. Again, yes, correct. As Manny is nitpicking here, Corsi approximates offensive zone possession and not straight zone time. It's when they've done tests of zone time, it's not too far off, Manny. I remember the PvP guys for Toronto, timed zone time, and it was pretty damn great correlation. But you get the idea. The idea is easier to explain this way, so pardon me if I'm making some small inaccuracies. It's what you do when you're talking. Right, as Ethan points out, obviously a positive Corsi, which again is a proxy to... I wasn't talking about Vic, Manny. I was talking about I think Drag Pole did it 2 years ago, last year, when the Toronto guys were saying that Corsi was underestimating the amount of offensive zone ice time they had. That's what I was doing. But whatever. So the idea is that when you have a greater Corsi, you will be outscoring your opponents generally, assuming you have average shooting and average goaltending. And when, Tavares in the second season had above 50% Corsi, and his plus-minus was just under average, which was entirely due to his goaltending. Again, should not be surprising to anyone. He had .900 goaltending behind him that season. So, of course, he was going to be, negative plus-minus. But that isn't saying much. And the next season, so the lockout season happened. Tavares, again, even better, was better than the team. Though this time, without Tavares on the ice, the Islanders weren't bad. I mean, they weren't great. So if Tavares is plus 4.6%, it means the Islanders, without him on the ice during those games, was at 48.4%. Again, that's mediocre at best. It's probably 20th in the league, but that's 20th in the league without your first line on the ice, and, most teams are not going to be great without their first line on the ice. So that's still pretty good. That's really good. And again, notice how his Corsi is increased by 2.6% here, even though his relative Corsi is only increased by a small amount. What that means, believe it or not, is that not only did Tavares improve relative to his team, but his team got better. He was being better relative to his team despite playing with a better team. So even though the guys below him were better, and so again, relative Corsi compares your first line, for example, here to say your second, third, and fourth lines. Even though those guys got better, Tavares was still even better than those guys. Everything was doing right. He was point per game. He had an insane amount of goals. That was a bit fluky. He was never going to shoot 17% for his career, but he still was at an amazing season. And incidentally, while he shot a fluky amount, his shooting percentage would suggest that he got unlucky with assists. So a more average Islander season for Tavares would be like the next season he had point-wise. We're going to get to that one in a second. So this season comes along, and Tavares scores a ton. 66 points, 59 games is great. Here's the issue. He suddenly stopped doing better than the rest of his teammates by that much. He was still positive. And as I'll get to in a second, it wasn't the case necessarily for Vanek and Okposo and Molson. But he was barely positive. And it wasn't like he was barely positive because the rest of his teammates got better. They didn't. His teammates were at 48.7%. The previous year, they were at 48.4%. That's basically the same thing. The teammate level was the same, but Tavares wasn't much better. And so that's a problem right there. Now, why is that a problem? What does that mean? Why can't Tavares just keep printing these points? Why can't he have a positive plus-minus in these things? Well, first of all, let's talk about why his plus-minus was positive. Why did the Islanders outscore opponents with Tavares in the ice last year? It comes to this number. Now, this number is called PDO. It's a combination of shooting percentage and save percentage. Two things happened with Tavares on the ice that hadn't happened before. One, the Islanders had a .917 save percentage. Now, that's still below the NHL average. Okay, let's not say that that's extremely high. Here's the issue. The Islanders goaltenders without Tavares on the ice were like .9. So, unless you believe John Tavares is suddenly making the Islanders goaltenders just below average instead of a tire fire, no, that wasn't realistic to expect to continue. They're not that good. So that's one thing that helps. The other is this one here. Now, this is something that's a little harder to understand. It's a little more controversial. Shooting percentage and how well your teammates shoot varies quite a bit from season to season, and most of that is not player's skill. Now, this is a weird thing to say because, you want to say that Tavares, Vanek, and Okposo during that stretch from January, late December to early February, had insane chemistry and everything he did went in. And it seemed to do so. And that's what this is reflecting right here. And by the way, this number gets even more insane for Vanek, so we'll get there in a second. With Tavares on the ice, after shooting roughly around 8%, 8.5 the two previous seasons, 7.8 the season before, I'll get to that. That's a good question, Ethan. 1 second. 10% is ridiculously high here. You're not wrong what PDO is. Just for a second, let's look at what PDO. Let's look at the average PDO. Let's look at the average shooting percentage. Okay, honest shooting percentage of hockey players over the last, say, 4 years. This shouldn't be this big. Sorry. So, 10% seems very high. An average would be around 8%. Here we go. So how high is 10%? Tavares was at 10.3%. Well, over the last 4 years, only 7 players have had a shooting percentage that high. Actually, one of them is Vanek, but we'll get to him in a second. Those are Crosby, who undeniably affects this, Stamkos, who affects it in a completely different way, a guy who played with Stamkos, Alex Tanguay, who's another Stamkosian player, Kunitz, Ben, Vanek, and then you suddenly lose these guys. They basically all, the best guys, guys in the best shooting teams will be around 9% above their average, will be around 8%, etc., etc. Now, what am I saying here? Well, there's 2 ways really to have a high on-ice shooting percentage. The one is to be a freak like Stamkos. And Stamkos shoots 18% every year, takes the majority of his, takes a ton of shots. Tavares and Stamkos. They're both number 1 picks. But John Tavares is basically an 11%, 12% shooter. He's never going to be a Stamkosian. He pulled it off one year, and even then, he only had an 8.5% on-ice shooting percentage because his teammates didn't shoot that high. The other way is to be, basically is rare. It's basically Crosby-ish. It's to basically be a god of hockey. Crosby is a freak. He undoubtedly affects shooting percentage. And this is the key here. We're not saying that players don't affect their teammates' shooting percentage. They do. And for some players, like a Crosby, or probably more commonly for bad players, they will maybe decrease the shooting percentage by a bit of their teammates. Absolutely. But the effect isn't large, and just luck, puck bounces, is the bigger factor in it. So, what happens there is that, and thank you, Manny. What happens there, by the way, if I'm not answering any questions, I'll try and talk some questions, take some question and answers around 9:45. I have till around 10 o'clock this time. So, essentially what happens is that puck bounces are a greater factor in shooting percentage. And Tavares has never really been a guy who seems to increase his teammates that much. Yeah, I think his assists have been great. But he also admit Molson was a high shooting percentage player, and despite that, wasn't that high. And Okposo, as we'll get to, wasn't really a high shooting percentage player. So essentially, what happened here is that the point number was a bit inflated by luck. And the plus-minus is inflated by luck. And if you didn't have that luck, you're starting to talk about a first line that isn't really outplaying the opposition, despite being your first line, your dominant players. And that's not what you like. Now, I just want to talk for a second about why that is. Why doesn't Tavares outscore the opposition by a ton? Why was that an issue? Well, Tavares is interesting. So, I've been doing the last 2 years, I've tracked the neutral zone. What I mean is that I've rewatched every Islander game over the last 2 seasons and tracked every time the Islanders or opponents went from the neutral zone into the offensive or defensive zone. And we tracked the methods that they did so, whether they did so by carry or by dump, whether they did so with control, like by carry or pass, or without control, by dump or by tipping. Obviously, a carry-in's more dangerous, and it's about double or more dangerous than a dump-in. And Tavares is a carry monster. You've seen Tavares dart through the neutral zone so often, and he's the best guy at getting the puck in via the carry. Greatest percentage of his entries of any Islander is by carry. Here's the problem. This is true for opponents also. Tavares' style leads to back and forth, fast breaks both ways. And that's an issue right there. The defense skills of John Tavares in neutral aren't good. He's not helping there, whatever that is. And that's been probably an issue his entire career. But this is the first year he still hasn't been out shooting opponents by a good amount, relative to his teammates, despite the fact this is basically the same. So I want to just quickly go to this thing right here. So this is some neutral zone results. Yeah, to detract me, correct, Manny. It's very Senators-like to throw Manny a bone because Manny's a Senators fan. So here's Tavares last year. I wanted to point this out here. So this is Tavares last year. I've just stripped up some bare bones numbers here, okay? This is Fenwick, by the way. That's not important what it is. And this is only 5v5. And this is not including some factors. So here, Tavares is a slightly above average neutral zone player. If you just went by the neutral zone, the Islanders have a 50.4% Fenwick. Here's the thing. He's at least an above average offensive player, basically at least average offensive defensive zone in terms of shots. Okay? These numbers are probably a little bit deflated due to some factors I don't want to mention right now. It's not worth it. Here's the bigger issue right here. This is this year. Tavares is a little bit worse in the neutral zone. Fine. That's because the team is a little bit worse in the neutral zone. They're playing less with Wisnowski, great neutral zone player, more with Amac. Fine. But it was much worse in the offensive and defensive zone. Now, some of that may be luck. There's some evidence out there that offensive zone shots and defensive zone shots are less consistent in the neutral zone and are affected by luck. That's totally possible. I mean, listen, your best offensive zone player by this method, by neutral zone tracking, your best offensive zone Islander the last 2 years, both years, is Matt Carpenter. So, yeah, there's some oddities there. Yes, Matt Carpenter, offensive genius. But at the same time, it's still something of concern because the Islanders started the season. So here's what happened at the end. Let's go back to the lockout season for a second. The end of the lockout season, the Islanders had that run. I talked about this last year. They pulled a 56% Corsi during that run. They basically were the Kings for the last 20 games of the season. Here's the funny thing. Tavares' relative Corsi during that string was even or negative. Why? Because the whole team was playing ridiculous. Sorry for getting loud here. The whole team was playing ridiculous. Again, he wasn't playing that much better than the rest of the team, but the team was, O'Coin was playing with 60% Corsi, Nielsen at 57%. If you're playing, on the Kings level, you don't really mind if you're not playing better than the rest of the team because the team's insane. This season started, and the first 8 games with Wisnowski, the Islanders were bad. Even with Wisnowski, they were not good during these 8 games. And again, Tavares wasn't better than the rest of them, and that's the issue right there. Something about this team, even when healthy in the beginning, caused them to start off a ton worse than last year. Now, that may be a coaching issue, or that would be a line issue, because Tavares all of a sudden was now with Okposo. You see here, this is the first 8 games of the season right here, and yeah, it's pretty ugly. This is where they were the last 20 games of last season. This is where they started the first 10 games. Yikes! Not good. So I'm going to talk about the 2 line mates of Tavares here, okay? So we had Kyle Okposo and Thomas Vanek. I want to quickly go through Vanek because he's not on the team anymore. And then we're going to go through Okposo because he's more interesting. And then we're going to go to Nelson to answer Ethan's question. Sorry, extra skater's going slowly. So, let's look at Vanek just with the Islanders right here. So again, Vanek put up nearly a point per game with the Islanders. Amazing. Did so only shooting 12.4% because a lot of it was shots. Takes more penalties than he draws, fine. But again, you'll notice here, Vanek, despite playing with Tavares, who was about plus 1% relative Corsi, was basically negative a percent. Vanek is not a positive possession player. He hasn't been his entire career. He's basically either even or worse. In other words, when we're talking about how Tavares, every year of his career, has probably been a guy allowing track meets, and has basically been a guy who, despite that, would drive possession forward, Vanek is probably just as bad defensively, and he doesn't drive possession, he makes it slightly worse. Now, you live with that. Vanek's a great scorer, but it's an issue there. And you'll note, by the way, Vanek's a great scorer, and I didn't mention this with Tavares, but it's also there. Tavares had some more easier zone starts, meaning he got more offensive face-offs this year than in previous years, and Vanek got even more. Shut up, Manny. You'll notice here, with Vanek on the ice, the Islanders shot 12%. Yeah. That's ridiculous right there. And that's extremely fluky. And hilariously, that got even crazier with the Canadians. He got 14.5%. Unless you think, Vanek can do this all the time, Vanek's career is at, we just saw this a second ago, Vanek's career, the last 4 seasons, is 10.3%, and it was even lower before then, so odds are, yeah, that's not happening again. So again, the Vanek thing was very fluky. Oh, did sound cut out? Can anyone hear me? Okay, so I still have sound. Fine. Good. Sorry, Ethan. It's got to be on your end. Anyhow, I wonder if I dropped some frames there. Very weird. Anyhow, you get the idea here. Vanek did not help it. Vanek was possibly a problem. That's an issue with Vanek right there. And that's a problem there. Thanks, Brunsta. Now, Vanek's gone. But first I want to go to the other line mate he had. So, before this year, I brought up an interesting point. Okposo was talked about as the guy who would replace Brad Boyes. And Okposo happened to be one of 2 Islanders who didn't play better with Tavares in terms of possession than without Tavares. It's a pretty incredible feature here. John Tavares made everyone better but Kyle Okposo. And just to show that right here, I should have done Tavares here, but that's fine. So here's Tavares over the last 4 years. Again, sorry about the size. Let's shrink it a little. This may be hard to see, so I apologize. So this is players with Tavares, and this number, it's hard, sorry, you can't put them together on the screen at once, is without Tavares, and universally they're all worse, except for Kyle Okposo over here, who is at 50.3% with Tavares, and actually this time it's 49.9%, but Tavares is also 49.9%. Basically, before the season, Okposo and Tavares are better apart from each other. This season that slightly changed, but not by much. Now, I want to hide the players here. So let's look at Kyle Okposo's numbers here. Okposo put up nearly a point per game this year. Okposo has this weird thing where his shooting percentage seems to go odd, even, so bad, amazing, bad, amazing. By the way, that's another good one here, another bad one here. I have no clue. But Okposo's been a good 11% shooter, 10% shooter. Either average or slightly above average. This is a bit fluky, and his shooting is going to go down. Again, that's the luck right there. Okay? And Okposo was only, again, wasn't really much of a plus position player. Boy, this number right here is inflated because it got really better with the Nielsen line at the end of the season. And again, the Okposo put up this number despite suddenly having the most offensive faceoff of his career. So when I said on Twitter at one point that Tavares seemed to play better with Brad Boyes and Okposo, what I meant is that the puck was out of our zone the most with Brad Boyes rather than Kyle Okposo. It was a better line. It scored less. Okay? But it was a better line in the long run. And that's an issue. Now, it would be unrealistic to say that Okposo isn't going to start the season next year on Tavares' wing. I think that's pretty clear. Now, let's talk about that wasn't necessarily the case the whole time. So I want to go back to John Tavares over here. So this is John Tavares. So this is stats.hockeyanalysis.com. I'm going to put a link right now to this page in the chat. Here it is. So this is what we call Tavares' Wowie. I talked about this last time. Can you read the numbers on this? Let me know if you can read the numbers. I can see them much clearer now, but I know the stream gets a little worse quality. So this is Tavares' with or without you. So you can see how Tavares played with players. So again, you see Tavares played 927, 5 versus 5 minutes, and 800 of those were with Kyle Okposo. 600, so that's basically 90% of his time was with Okposo that season. And by the way, yeah. So, here, by the way, is Vanek. Vanek, 604 minutes with Tavares. And then Tavares played better without Vanek. But Tavares had some horrible luck shooting-wise. Basically, without Vanek, Tavares' teammates couldn't put in a puck for some reason, and the goaltender started giving up twice as many goals despite facing less shots. That's not Vanek's skill, that's just total luck. That's again what we're talking about here. So let's talk about the guy who was recently talked about as the leader to be on Tavares' wing. It was Brock Nelson. So if you remember, and I seem to have lost Manny, but that's okay. If you remember, Nelson got into Tavares' line when Vanek was sick or something. I don't remember what he had. It's about 10, 12, I don't know, not less games actually. Like what, 5 or 6 games? It sounds to be around 82 minutes. So about 5 or 6 games is about right. Just as they played together. They had a 50.5% Corsi during that period. Now they were outscored, but again, they managed, so just to get some comparisons in here, this is Vanek right here at the top, right here at your screen. Let's see if I can get this a little bit downwards. There we go. So this is Vanek right here in top highlighted. So with Vanek and Nelson, when you switch Vanek with Nelson, you had basically the same amount of shots for the Islanders. But you had 5 less shots against. So it's seemingly Nelson brought defense that Vanek didn't. And the shots are still the same. So, for a decent amount, the Islanders should greatly outscore, and they should do great with Nelson. Now, Nelson managed to do this with everyone. Nelson made everyone better. So it wasn't just Tavares. But if you want to talk about Nelson as a teammate of Tavares's, that's what you're looking at there. You're looking at a guy who can keep the offense of Tavares' other linemen. So Okposo, basically Tavares and Okposo should have similar stats, not completely the same, as we'll get to in a second, with Nelson as you would with Vanek, but they'd have much less shots against. That's a positive thing there. Wow, I seem to have lost Luke's as well. Oopsie. Didn't mean to do that. Yeah. So that's why Nelson sounds like a good idea. Because with Nelson on the Tavares line again, you regained that holy grail you had the previous years. That dominant possession line that also would score a ton. Now, this isn't to say that Nelson is necessarily the key, is going to solve the problem, and it's necessarily going to be an amazing line. There's also the issue that Nelson, he only scored about 30 points last year. It's one of the things that Islander fans seem to forget about. He scored 26 points. Now, some of that was, the fact that Nelson, didn't play anywhere near as minutes. Right now, if you look at the Islanders, let's go to the Islanders right here. Let's go to their page. So again, this is hockeyanalysis.com. I apologize if these numbers suddenly become unreadable. I'll try and fix this right here. So this is points per 60. I just reversed it. And so Nelson is 9th at points per 60. He's basically Kyle McDonald level on your point rate. Now, Strome wasn't much better, but again, Nelson was scoring less points than Brock Nelson. Than Josh Bailey, and you're scoring much less goals. So if that's the case, you might have some issues there. You probably want Nelson to get better. You probably think he'll score more. He scored, what did he score, like 50 points in the AHL his first season? So if he can get to 50 points, he's the first liner. And perhaps Tavares feeding him instead of some of the crap he played with, you'll get that. I mean, they scored a whole bunch with Nelson out there during that time. Let's put it this way. Nelson's top line mate was Cal Clutterbuck and then Josh Bailey. He didn't exactly play with offensive dynamos to get points there. Seriously. No, we cannot talk about AMAC. AMAC is done. Again, to bring AMAC slightly into it, when you lose AMAC, these guys should also score more because they should spend less time in the defensive zone. But that's not related to the forward line. So when we're talking about these things right here, we're talking about fixing the Islanders' first line. You really want to get back to what we saw before. You want to get to a team with your Islander first line being at least a 53% Corsi, meaning a very much above average team. Shut up, Luke's. And welcome back. You want to get back to that. You want to get back to that because also the rest of the team's going to be better. Now, there's some hope there for Nelson. Nelson actually had a ton of shots blocked or that missed the net last year. A ton of his shots didn't make the net. There's some statistical evidence, I need to go into it further, that suggests that the amount of your shots that you take that don't hit the net is a large amount lucky. In that, so for example, Josh Bailey's went from a guy who misses the net the most this year to one of the more common guys hitting the net last year to one of the guys who missed the net most the year before. And again, if you look at just attempts, Nelson was fourth on the amount of shot attempts of the team. Of course, the guys he's tied with right here, so you can see a bunch of kids up top. Lee and Strome are there, as well as Clutterbuck, but Clutterbuck's another story. Those guys all managed to get more of them on net. And for Nelson, a large amount of it, a decent amount of it was blocks, and a decent amount of it was misses. That should get better. The amount of shots you take that are blocked should get less. And so Nelson should put up some more points next year. And Nelson should make them a better defensive line. I'm just curious whether the scoring rate, given how Capuano seems to overreact to scoring, might make that line not last. We'll see. And so when I said before that Tavares was a problem last year, I didn't mean John Tavares' scoring was a problem. But to be that elite team, remember, the Kings' first line was Anze Kopitar, who doesn't score as much as John Tavares. But with Anze Kopitar out there, yeah, maybe you score 75% of John Tavares' points, but your opponent scores maybe half of what they do against John Tavares. And that's an elite first liner. Tavares wasn't there last year for the first time in his career. He should be. Something that I can't explain. And yes, Anze's a god, but we're talking John Tavares here. I'm not talking about Frans Nielsen and comparing him to Anze Kopitar. Frans Nielsen is a good, strong defensive player. Anze Kopitar is elite, one of the best players in the league. But John Tavares is a former first overall pick. He should also be one of the best players in the league. That's not an unfair comparison here. They're going to do it different ways. Tavares will be more of a scorer, and he'll never be as great in defense as Anze. But the percentages shouldn't be that far apart. And something went wrong last year. And by the way, I've seemed to make it more on Vanek than it should be. Because, again, those first 8 games, before Vanek even came, the first line had some issue. And I don't know what the hell it was. And so that was the problem right there. And so I think Nelson's a fix. I've talked about possibly, with all the glut of centers, if I had my druthers, I would see if you could convince Tavares to move to wing and put him on Nielsen to wing. Because Nielsen is the elite defensive in the neutral zone. Nielsen allows the least amount of entries. So in theory, I dream at Tavares and Nielsen's wing with Okposo, and then you have the scoring guy of Tavares, who'd also be great at carrying the puck in, on a line with the center who prevents guys from carrying in. To me, that seems like it would be a great line, and you've got enough centers that, oh no, Strome moves back to center, you could do it. To me, I would think heavily about it, and I would try. This is, again, pipe dream. It's not going to happen. Tavares is going to play center. But given the glut of centers, I think you'd be worth trying and risking there. And again, this seems pretty crazy to switch him after all these years, but it's pretty clear Tavares isn't great at defense. And that's what a center does. A center is more defensive responsible. So I wonder about that. So, that's pretty much what I've talked about with Tavares there. Yes, that's what I was talking about. Did I say Nelson? I meant Nielsen. I meant Nielsen centering JT, not Nelson. Sorry, I pulled a butch. Yeah. So to me, if I was to do lines, someone asked me last time, I would do Tavares, Nielsen, Okposo, second line, Grabowski, Kulemin, Lee, third line, Strome, Nelson, Grabner, fourth line, assuming Bailey's gone, would be Cizikas, Clutterbuck, Conacher. To me, that would be what I would do. But again, who knows? I mean, there's a lot of forwards to figure out right there. But to me, that would be an amazing hockey team. You'd have 2 lines, which I think Strome and Nelson combined would be an amazing center team. And then, Lee, I have high thoughts on, and Grabowski would be a great center. To me, that'd be an elite possession team. But it won't happen, so I can dream. Anyhow, so that's my talk about the Islanders' first line. I think I'll take some questions now, then maybe I'll move on to another topic. So if you guys have any questions, please ask them in chat. I'd love to answer them. Whether they be at the first line, whether they be about other guys. Okay, so I'll take Manny's question here. So this is Islanders neutral zone statistics here. This is actually the on ice numbers, so not the entries. It was centers for the Islanders, but it's close, I think. Yeah, let's go to the chart. I have it in here. That's the wrong chart. That's also the wrong chart. Where the heck did I put it? Okay, I put it here somewhere. It tends to be the centers, but it's not clear, Manny. Tavares takes the most entries of anyone. Well, actually, he didn't this year. Okposo took more. Okposo takes the highest rate of any Islander wears in a year. So just to satisfy Manny's little curiosity here, Okposo took, here it is. Okposo took 31% of his aligned entry. So in the first line was Okposo. It was the wingers, actually. The second line, it's funny. I'm going to give my answer here. It was the wingers this year because Okposo took so many entries from the wing. Usually the Tavares line previous years would take a greater bulk. But, Suzuki doesn't take very many entries, so he doesn't. Nielsen is amazing carrying in, but doesn't take as many entries, so maybe not him. And then we don't really know Strome. Nelson's up there, so Nelson would do it. Okay, even I think they're pretty good. I think they're really good. I think Tavares, Grabowski, and Nielsen are 3+ centers, even with Tavares' issues. I think with Grabowski and Nielsen, you also have 2 very strong centers who could play both offensively and defensively. Nielsen is probably going to get defensive minutes because people expect that, and people don't expect that of Grabowski, and it'll help Grabowski to have offensive. I think that's a strong center line. To answer your other question, it's hard to know what to expect from a rookie D-man. I expect him to be, again, a positive possession player. He was really positive possession. But there's been a few defensemen who put up really good rookie positive possession numbers and then promptly get, much worse. I remember Tyler Myers put up great possession numbers his first year and then it's been crap since until last year. That doesn't necessarily mean Tyler Myers is bad, and doesn't mean that Don's anything like Tyler Myers, who's a big guy, and Don's a much more mobile guy. But I do think that he can do it. But it's hard to predict a first-year guy. I don't know what you mean, Blukes. What do you mean get blurred? Why don't I segue that? So why don't we talk a little bit of the defense, and you guys can still have some questions right here, because I want to talk about the defense. So let's talk about the defense. Actually, I'll answer that question first because it's interesting here. By the way, Blukes, no. Okposo was already taking more percentage of entries before John Tavares went down. Okposo always takes a ton of entries. He did so last year as well. He just had less minutes. Ethan, to answer your question, not very much. Tavares actually had more ozone sheltering than any year prior. It was still a good amount. Now, maybe he'll get like Sedin-like ozone sheltering, but I get the feeling Grabowski is just going to play slightly more offensive minutes than defensive ones, and Tavares will stay pretty sheltered. Because the Islanders don't strike me as a team that likely... Did what die? Yeah, Sedin-like is not happening here. Sedin-like is not happening. Yeah, no, that's on your end, Mavis. So this is the Islanders' defensemen last year. We had 8 defensemen who played a decent number of minutes. They were Wisnowski, DeHaan, Donovan, Hickey, Hamonic. Nope, only 3 of these guys played a lot of minutes. So when I first pulled this up, only McDonald, Hamonic, and Hickey showed up because they're the only guys who met the criteria because of all our injuries and craziness. Chat's always going to be a bit delayed. So McDonald is gone, and I tried to point to that last time. McDonald was by far the worst possession player because McDonald allowed players to walk in without any issues with the puck. And it's funny. So Amac was not good the 2 years before this year. He got worse last year. I don't know what the hell happened, but whatever skills he had basically faded to nothingness last year. And that got even worse But this was bad even when he was with Vanek, and Vanek swiftly recovered as soon as he was removed from Amac's side. So he's gone. The real question mark to me is whether Brian Straight gets ice time. So right now, these 7 guys are still on the roster. We strongly suspect that Donovan won't have a starting job because Staples speculation, and I think that's probably right, also considering how they were doing. But this also, you know what, I'm going to add another, I'm going to slightly change the filter. There we go. Slightly changing the filter here because, sorry, slightly changing the filter again. That was not the D-men I meant to add. There we go. Much better. Sorry, I meant to add Kevin Churchman, who's still on the roster, and somehow added Aaron Ness instead. Ness is gone. We can say goodbye to Ness. Ness sucks. Churchman had some bad possession numbers last year. But unlike Straight here, Churchman had some neutral zone numbers that made me think he may not be anywhere as bad as he looks. So his neutral zone numbers were bad, I knew. And by the way, Brian Straight had good neutral zone numbers to Strike. But a large part of that was that he was preventing guys from carrying in. This is Churchman right here. I apologize. These numbers are probably hard to see, so let me zoom in a little. Here we go. That should be better. So these numbers here are the percentage of entries into the offensive zone by either team. So this 50% again means even, above 50% is good, yada yada. This is percent of your entries right here with control. So how much by carry in, the percentage of opponents' entries. So Churchman last year had horrible neutral zone numbers, despite the fact that the Islanders carried in a greater percentage of the time by a lot than against with him on the ice. And that was because the Islanders ski up a ton more entries. I'm skeptical that that'll continue. I tend to think these two skills, for the Islanders at least, they tend to be stronger, more repeatable, and this tends to be more flukish. So I think Churchman's overall possession numbers are a bit fluky, and the Islanders seem to like it. So I think there's a good chance he'll be in the opening roster. There's a chance he'll be in the AHL. There's a chance Reinhardt will make it, but whatever there. But anyhow, so let's put Churchman. So right now there are 8 basically D-men on the roster. There's these 5, which is Wisnowski, Dahan, Donovan, Hickey, Vanek, assuming Wisnowski's healthy, and if he's not, there are some issues. Then you've got Karkner, Churchman, and Straight. Here's the issue here. Straight was terrible. Straight was basically AMAC light. And there's no reason to think he won't be AMAC light next year. He was bad. By Mavis. This right here is your zone starts. I just pointed with my finger and expected you guys to follow it. This column right here is your zone starts. So this one. And this is Straight here in a second. And this is basically the same as AMAX, 48.6%, which is not very defensive. It's slightly easier than AMAX, and his numbers were just slightly better than AMAX. Again, he was AMAC light. So to me, the question is, if Reinhardt replaces, and say, Brennan or Churchman or whatever, or whoever they bring in, replaces Straight, even if Donovan's gone, you also have a defense that should be a lot better. Because all the other guys drove possession forward. You see all these pluses? It means they drove possession positively. Donovan's numbers, whether they're fluky or not, is questionable, but they look nice. Definitely did. Dahan really did. Wisnowski always does. You know this isn't fluky. If Wisnowski's healthy, he can do it. Hamnick's numbers are plus 1.4%, despite all the time he played with freaking AMAC. Yup. And Hickey was pretty good, despite the fact he also played with AMAC for a substantial period of time. So if you replace Straight, all of a sudden you've got a pretty good defense, and you've got a pretty, much better forward line. So that's why the team should be better. That's why defense-wise they should be better right there. So I hope that answers your question there, Ethan, a little bit. In terms of things go. Now, could they improve? Sure. Like I said, I'd speculated about trading for either a Franzen, a Petrie. Who are the other guys I speculated on? Hold on. I'll go back to them in a second. Whatever. Yeah, I talked about possible defensemen. There's also one who I can't remember his name on the Senators, who I think is probably would be a more interesting guy than those guys. The problem with Franzen and Petrie now is that they're now signed to one-year deals and will be unrestricted free agents at year's end. So Franzen is definitely available. He's not, cheap. It's Weircock is the guy I was talking about, by the way. Patrick Weircock. Weircock? I don't know how to pronounce that. It's a terrible name. To me, he seems like a really good player who just got a terrible situation. He looks, his numbers look really solid. Hey, I like Yandel too. Oh, hi, Manny. No, yes, we do want him. Sorry. Again, Sens fan. I mean, look, this is Weircock's numbers right here. Again, yay, very big positives. We like that. So, listen, if they could get one of those guys in there, and even if one of those guys replace Donovan, as long as Straight's gone, you're probably in really good shape. I've said that I'm probably a bit more negative on Reinhart than other people are. I still think Reinhart's going to be very good. Well, let me phrase that. I think Reinhart's a decent chance to be an NHL defenseman, even if he's only a second pair. I think, again, as I said before, there's some worries about the fact that he couldn't score in juniors, because the best D-men score in juniors, even if they're not scorers in the NHL. But again, when people have done some fancy stats in the WHL, Reinhart looks great. No. No, Manny. And if he makes a team, they'll seem to have really liked him, and he'll be playing a lot easier minutes than he won't exactly be playing top minutes right away. I think it's pretty clear that Hahn's playing with Hamnick. It's pretty clear Wisnowski's playing with Hickey to start the year, which means Reinhardt's on third pair. And so, it wouldn't really be rushing him to have Reinhardt at 20 start the season. Yeah. I mean, the thing is that I suspect Straight's... I can't imagine him getting rid of Straight unless he's part of a trade, and not having to be at least start in the roster, whether he makes the top six or not, simply because Straight's got 2 more years in this deal. But he was bad. He was not good. And there's really nothing redeeming to say about it. And, I talked about Donovan having really gorgeous possession numbers. Donovan's possession numbers with and without Straight are hilarious. Let's actually look at that because we can't. It's very funny. So this is Matt Donovan. Where's Brian Straight? Here it is. So they played 120 minutes together, during which they were, holy crap, they were a 38% Corsi team. So what that means is that they managed 12 shot attempts on the opposing net and gave up like nearly 20. When Donovan was without Straight, Donovan gave up 2 less shots, despite Straight being supposedly defensive, and made up 10 more shots. And that was just a horrendous pair. So God willing, that never gets seen again. That was just not good. Straight's not a good hockey player. Lest you think that was a two-way thing, yeah, Straight improved with that Donovan, but he was at 45%. There's just no combination which made Brian Straight a good defenseman last year. And he's not young. He's really not. That's basically where I think I've wrapped up all I want to say tonight. So, unless anyone's got some more questions, so I'll wait like another minute or two for anyone to ask. Thanks for coming out. I know this was quick. I just wanted to test to make sure the stream was working, and I'll look at the quality in a little bit. How would you say the video was today? Much better. And you can read the numbers, right? Okay, that's good to know. So I'm going to be using this program for these chats, even if I use other things for them. So anyway, yeah, next time, because I'm pretty sure I have my video settled out, I'm going to probably announce this a little bit. I'll probably announce this. Thanks, Manny, for coming. Yeah, Blutes, I think I was fine today. Well, we'll see. Anyhow, yeah, so I think next time I'm going to announce this a little more ahead of time. I'll announce it in LHH, and I'll have somebody, one of your LHH guys, or maybe one of you guys, on Skype, so we can actually have conversations going, so I don't feel like I'm talking to myself. But this way, I really feel it's a lot easier to get through showing things rather than just talking. And it's easier to talk about these things than to write it out, so I'm not complaining. Anyhow, thanks, guys, and I appreciate it. And I will put this up, and I'll hopefully archive for others to watch. Bye.